Every opportunity that you're talking with somebody is an opportunity to communicate.
You will be successful in this world if you can communicate and collaborate.
Take steps to realize your vision and make it into a reality. And everything amazing in our lives comes from uncertain situations. Lives can be beautiful, but they can also be tragic and painful. And that is part of the human existence.
Welcome to Self-Aware Podcast, where we explore self-awareness and personal growth. Today, we're thrilled to have Scott Stirrett, founder of Venture for Canada, and author of the upcoming book, The Uncertainty Advantage. I want, Scott, I think this is really interesting, your book. You opened up with the struggle, and I know with anxiety and OCD, and especially during the pandemic, which we all experienced that. How did you have self-compassion, but how did that become a lifeline for you? Can you kind of go into your lowest point then?
During COVID-19, I was diagnosed with OCD, and I remember the lowest point that I had was I was lying on the floor of my living room, and I just had all these intrusive thoughts. And intrusive thoughts essentially are like the scariest things that you could imagine.
Yes.
And they're just barraging in your head. And I just remember lying on the ground and thinking, like, these thoughts need to get out of my head. And I almost reached a point where I said to my partner, I was like, okay, I need to go to the hospital. I can't deal with what is going on in my head right now. And eventually I felt better. I didn't end up going to the hospital. And I'm really glad because I was also peak COVID. So I probably would have gone COVID. So
Yeah.
that was a good call. And one of the things that I ended up saying to myself to help me on this long journey of feeling better, which was the importance of having self-compassion, even like in the context of a mental illness. Like often people have self-compassion when they get physical illness, but when you get a mental illness, you can blame yourself. And to say to myself in that moment, like, I have this mental illness, it is so tough. It is really challenging. And just to acknowledge and sort of sit and to have compassion for myself was really important, because what partly got me in that hole was I was so angry at myself, and that anger just fed the anxiety and made everything worse.
Do you feel like, because we have a lot of listeners that can relate to this, and they may feel paralyzed by anxiety, especially like everything that's going on. I mean, every second things are changing constantly in this uncertain world. I want to start off with kind of a practical step, something that they can do today to shift from like fear to action, because that's what a lot of the book is about. Can you kind of share some practical steps, something that may have helped you or something that you learned?
Take one step each day to achieve your goal or objective. And it could just be as small as like sending like an email. But I feel like there's so many people who they don't move forward because of this imposter syndrome, or this sense that they get paralyzed by their anxiety and they just don't act. So if there's one piece of advice I would have is like, just think of like, if you're doing nothing, just think of what is the smallest possible thing that you can do in the course of a day to move something forward.
I know there's this, it's trying to get the shift. And especially like I'm Gen X, so I'm that older generation, but like your generation and younger, there's this fearfulness. And a lot of times I think the fear, and I'll have a lot of, on the self-aware leader side of things, I'll have a lot of 20-year-olds that are like, oh my God, I'm 25 and my life is over and I haven't got this, or I'm 22 and I'm still with my parents. I can't believe it. I'm not this Instagram entrepreneur, making millions of dollars online. How do you go from fear to action? And in these overwhelming moments, what does that look like, that shift, from fear to action?
One of the biggest mistakes that I think a lot of people make, in particular a lot of young people, is the myth of the one big choice. That one choice is what is going to define their life. And the reality is that our lives are defined by thousands of little choices, and in some ways, tens of thousands of little choices. So one of the most important things that you can do if you're paralyzed by anxiety in these moments is to recognize that even if this choice ends up being a failure, it's one of 10,000 choices. And you have another 9,999 that you can make later on. And some of those will end up working out.
Yeah, no, I love that, because I think for a lot of times, I always talk about, like software in the sense I'm in the tech side of the world. We do updates and it's, or you want to call it like 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, and it's kind of like the same thing. We don't make like this huge update. We make daily or weekly updates to make the software more stable and for it to be more accurate. And I feel like that's the same way in our lives. It's like we're just pivoting constantly. It's not like you said, the myth of this one big huge thing that's going to totally make or break me.
Yeah, we have to be adaptable because we live in a world that's more dominated by VUCA. I saw you're a Marine, so you know what
Mhm.
the VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous world. And in a VUCA world, your best laid plans are eliminated so quickly. So
Oh,
rather than be like, this is my 5 year life plan, this is my 5 year business plan, think in terms of like quarters and be extremely iterative and respond to what's happening because you get into big issues when you create these big plans in your head, and then a VUCA world just eliminates them all of a sudden.
yeah, no, I love that, Scott. I know in your book, you challenged the myth that self compassion is weakness. There's so much critical thinking, especially when I talk to people and they're like, I'm not good enough. That inner critic is just screaming at them constantly, in their head. What is this, view of self compassion as weakness? And how do you view it as resilience?
Self compassion is something that it can be your career superpower because it is a friend that can last with you for decades versus like self esteem, which is when you think, hey, I can do this. Like I can be an amazing trumpet player. That's like good positive self esteem. Self esteem exists when you do something well versus self compassion is like a friend that will be with you for the rest of your life and ultimately can help you be more like resilient and impactful. So self compassion is not weakness. It's actually one of the most strategic things you can do to set yourself up for success long term.
Do you have like a specific story that you could think of or something that, was a setback where you practice self compassion with yourself?
The OCD example is one that is definitely most like prominent that comes to mind. But I'd say another example is when I was starting Venture for Canada, and it was really tough. Like I left Goldman Sachs when I was 22 years old. I had a plum job in New York City making good money, and I went to create a not for profit in Canada where there was no money. And it was this, Jason, a lot of people thought I was like nuts. They were like, what is this guy doing? Who leaves Goldman Sachs to go launch a not for profit with no resources? And the first couple of years were brutal. Like it was constant cash flow challenges, really hard in terms of kind of getting funding. And I think sometimes in my darkest or lowest moments when we were running out of cash and I thought things were going to shut down was to sit and say, like, other people are having really significant challenges and just to recognize I'm not alone in this. And then two is to recognize like how would a friend talk to me in this moment and talk to myself like a nice friend rather than being hard on myself for not being more successful.
Yeah, I know. I love that. I heard the other day from someone here on the podcast, they said there's three things that businesses or not for profits face, and that is payroll. And the second one is payroll. And the third one is sales. Like those are the three things that they have problems with. So, it's so as a leader, it's tough not to get down on yourself. Like, how do you have self compassion whenever you're looking, it's Tuesday and there's not enough money in the bank account to pay payroll on Friday?
One important kind of clarification is that I think self compassion is really important, but so is ambition. So it's finding kind of this balance between the two because you constantly need to be striving. If you're in some ways too self compassionate, you will get into kind of challenges. But and I could talk a little bit more about that later. But to answer your question specifically, I think when you're in those really stressful moments, it's sometimes not to sugarcoat it and just to say, this is a really stressful moment. This is a really high stakes moment, and that's okay. And don't dance around it.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that. And I think that, my generation, I was raised really poor, in a poor situation. So I kind of got used to rejection and failure. I mean, it was demonstrated around me constantly. But this new generation, especially with the amount of, especially here in the United States or in Canada where you're at, there's so much privilege. A lot of people don't experience, younger people, they may not experience rejection or failure till they're older. So it totally devastates them. And I heard whether you agree or disagree with them, it doesn't matter. I heard Joe Rogan say one time, he said, the worst thing that's ever happened to you is the worst thing that's ever happened to you. So if your latte temperature's off and that's the worst thing that's ever happened to you, that could totally wreck you. And I want people to understand that I'm saying this from a compassionate viewpoint because some people think that there's something fucked up about them or something messed up and that they respond too sensitive to things when it actually they just haven't failed enough and they haven't put themselves out there enough to get rejected. Like in like job search, workplace, I talk to a lot of people that really face issues with rejection or failure. How do you handle that with self-compassion?
One point that I think is really important is tough times make tough like people.
Yeah.
And and that's from Tony Robbins, not me,
Mhm.
but I think it is really true. And when you have setbacks, I think one of the things that's important to reframe in your mind is that it's about the journey, not necessarily like the outcome. Because at the end of the day, we don't control outcomes, but we can control like our actions. When you have a setback, I think it's to recognize like, what did I learn from this?
Mhm.
And to say like, thank you for the setback. It taught me a lot of valuable lessons. It was a good data point, and I will use this data to be more effective in the future.
Yeah, I love that. I want to talk about this before we get into I want to get into adaptation. It's one of my favorite things, especially with evolution. But I want to stay on this theme of like rejection and failure and hard work and resilience, kind of getting your teeth kicked in. Not very many people get accepted at Goldman Sachs. That's the high. So I know what you did, and that's awesome. I'm glad you followed your soul and went in that direction. But as a young person, there are people that want what you had, or maybe that's their aspiration to be there, to be in New York, to be in Manhattan, to or be at a Goldman Sachs or a banker or whatever. You had to work really hard to get there, I would imagine. Are you just ultra smart and it was easy for you?
I had to work really hard. I didn't study business in university at all. And I studied international relations. I went to Georgetown University in the United States in Washington, D.C. And I applied to go work at Goldman Sachs for an internship initially, just via the campus job board. And I remember getting the automatic notification saying, you have an interview at Goldman Sachs on Monday. And it was a Friday. And I was like, holy crap, like what? This is so stressful. I know nothing about finance. I've never worked in a financial institution before. And it was the Monday after the Super Bowl. And I'm not a big football person,
Mhm.
but I was like, okay, there's probably a good chance like my interviewer might be likes football. So I think one of the only times I've watched the Super Bowl was that Sunday, just so I could be able to like talk about it at the beginning of the interview. But I literally just did like a 2-day deep dive too on like what does Goldman Sachs do? What is the I ended up talking to someone who worked at Goldman Sachs that like weekend. Yeah, and then I ended up doing the interview. I actually didn't get an internship for like 6 weeks after that, so I was definitely not their first pick, but I ended up getting in. And then went to go work at Goldman Sachs for a in a summer internship. I worked really hard, 60, 70-hour weeks. I got a return offer. So to your question, Jason, like there were a lot of steps, and if I was to even take a step back, like getting into Georgetown, like working really hard in high school, working hard in Georgetown to get the resume to get me even an interview, like there was so many steps to get to that point. But I think the thing I realized was like the final thing I'll say to address the beginning thing you were talking about is like I think follow your passion is actually like BS like advice, which is kind of ironic in the context of my kind of career. I think it's more about like align your skills with what you're like good at. And I think for me is like the reason I left Goldman Sachs wasn't follow your passion. It was that the kind of role I was in was fundamentally actually not what I'm like good at. So it didn't set me up for success like long term to or even medium term to be doing something that ultimately I wasn't going to be that good at versus venture for Canada, way more aligned with my skill set. And it was more a case of skill set career alignment than it was follow your passion.
Yeah, but I think it put you in a good situation, Scott. Tell me if I'm wrong. The working the 60, 70 days a week set you up and seeing an organization at the top. I mean, they've got shit dialed in compared to other organizations, financial institutions. But to set you up at that level and to kind of, you push to 70 hours a week that's fucking like a lot. And then now you're going to do a not for profit. So it's like, hey, I know how to work. Like I can work my ass off. So I just demonstrated that here. So I could do that here. So do you think it kind of like that adaptation to that and then you changing in the job market? Do you think that, kind of shaped you for what was going on with Venture for Canada?
I have absolutely zero regrets about working at Goldman Sachs. Like it was a phenomenal like learning opportunity. I worked for basically equivalent of like probably 15 or 16 months like total, I think at Goldman Sachs between the internship and full time. And that taught me like so much about high performance culture, about discipline. Like I would remember waking up at like 5:30 in the morning, going to the gym, being in the office by like 8 a.m. sharp, leaving the office at 6:30, getting home at 8. Like it was a intense boot camp really for me. And I think a lot of people, are in college and they had to have that they work hard, but you're sleeping into
Yes.
30 or 9. It's like in the whole scheme of life, it's actually not that hard.
Mhm.
And Goldman Sachs was like a boot camp for like real world in terms of what do you need to do. And so when I started Venture for Canada, I was the only employee. I was in an apartment. I was 22 years old, so super young. I was living in Toronto where I actually had never lived in my entire life. And I had that kind of discipline in the first year of VFC where I woke up at 6 in the morning, I worked out, and I would start the work at 7:30 or 8 in the morning. And I worked till like I did Goldman Sachs hours, but in the context of my own thing.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So I learned a lot.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that's great. And I think, especially in these younger generations, and I hope that, and I always push this on our podcast, is that's what it takes sometimes. It's just a period, whether it's 15 months, like you said, or whatever. If you want to reshape your life or redesign your life, they call it monk mode or whatever, but go into that. You'll learn so much about yourself because I don't think it's the hours of work. It's what you learn from that self-awareness. It's like going to the gym is all mental. It has nothing to do with the physical part. It's just the mental. But I want to get into, because I know in your book you highlight adaptability as crucial, especially with the job market, what's happening with AI and automation. For someone that's feeling overwhelmed by the need to constantly upskill or pivot, do you have like a mindset shift that you did or habit that you recommend? Can kind of stay adaptable, but then at the same time, don't burn out.
In terms of learning, I think one of the most important things you can do is to recognize learning is part of your job. I think some people view learning as this like add-on thing. It's a nice to have. It's a need to have, especially with AI. Like if you're not investing in constantly learning, you are going to be left behind. It's like I see so many ads now with the phrase like AI won't replace leaders. Leaders who use AI will replace leaders who don't. And it is trite, but it's also true. At the end of the day, you need to be investing in learning constantly. And you also need to be adaptable to say, oh, this is a new emerging thing. I need to dive in there to become an expert in that. And it's the first movers, the people who embrace these kind of new skill sets as they come up. In our context, like, okay, AI agents, like there's a lot out there, but there's a lot of people, not that many people necessarily effectively using them. Like, ask yourself as a recent grad, like, how can you become expert at leveraging AI agents and like anti-money laundering? Once you develop these niches, you can be really successful in your career.
Yeah, I've got an AI agent pulled up right now. I've been learning it and studying it, because I'm on chief marketing officer. So for me, this is, this is a no brainer, as far as that. And I think there's going to be a whole, just as there was in the internet, I think this is bigger. I think AI is bigger than the internet. But I think there's going to be, as we created, the largest companies in the S&P 500 are internet companies, Apple, Microsoft, software companies. Now we're going to have these AI companies. They're going to be the largest. NVIDIA is already there. But what's crazy about it, I think, is you're going to have whole cultures, subcultures, economic development that's all new. Like you just said, these AI agents, there's going to be companies. That's all they do. And then we're going to each have AI agents, and our companies your not-for-profit's going to have AI agents, and AI agents are going to be talking to each other. It's pretty wild what's coming.
I agree. I think we live in extremely exciting times, also sometimes nerve-wracking. And I think you can sit with both at the same time, that there's excitement and fear. But
Yes.
yeah, I think you're going to have more and more companies that grow to be really large with almost no employees. A guy, Henry Shee, on LinkedIn that I follow, who's a Canadian who founded a multi-billion-dollar tech company in the US, super.com. And he will post like every week or every couple of days, like what's the next AI company that's hit 30 million annual recurring kind of revenue and how many employees they have. And it's amazing how many companies are emerging that have like $30 million annual income and like 8 employees. And AI enables this like nothing we've ever seen.
Yeah, no, I love it. There's a theme in your book, and you describe anti-fragility as growing stronger from chaos. I kind of want to get into the theme of that. What does that look like, for you, and how can somebody learn how to be anti-fragile?
Fundamentally, you need to get out of your comfort zone. It goes back to what you were saying earlier. If you're never pushing yourself, you're never going to get like stronger and you're going to atrophy. It's the same, like if you never work out, you're going to become like weak and like lethargic. The same thing goes in your like life. You need to be pushing yourself out of your comfort zone every single day. And you need to be thinking about in the context of like 10,000 like decisions you make. What are like 10,000 like risks? And how do you gradually push that so you take bigger and bigger risks in kind of in your life and career? And there's a great line from American poet Robert Frost where he says, "The only way out is through." And I love that. I think that we live in times that are very volatile and in some ways like incredibly uncertain. And it's to say if you're a listener and that like scares you, that's like okay. But the way that you're going to be more resilient long term is by embracing challenge. The more that you run from the volatility and then the uncertainty, the more that that volatility and uncertainty will eat you up.
Yeah, you're so right about that. There's so much, it's interesting because I think this is going to help so many young leaders, with this. It's like dating culture now, is like there's nothing. Like no one's like in my age, I'm old, I'm 52. So, back in my day, you sat across from each other and you had a date and you talked and you communicated, and you had to take them out multiple times. There was no hookup culture, none of that. I mean, probably was, but it wasn't like mainstream. But when you're looking at this now, it's like we almost want everything easy. Like, we want and we're just living for comfort, which makes you so fragile. I mean, you could break at any moment if you're just comfort. I'm reminded of, and I want you to talk about this a little bit, like embracing the chaos, but I'm reminded of Wall-E, that cartoon movie. I don't know if you remember that, where they're just floating around drinking shakes, watching little screens, and they're just floating on this, like bed or something. And they just do that all day long. That's not comfort. That's the ego deceiving you. Do you feel like being anti-fragile is a much needed something that people aren't recognizing now or not understanding, especially the younger generation? How do you balance that? I know like you can have burnout. I get that, but the small sustainable steps you talk about in your book, and then having self-care at the same time. I think that's the key, like what you talk about.
Yeah, and the first part of like, do I think that a lot of people kind of ignore the importance of anti-fragility? I think yes. I think that there's a lot of people who do not sufficiently appreciate this, but also I think there's a lot of people out there hustling hard. So it's hard to
Right.
generalize, but there's too many people out there who buy into this false sense that what doesn't kill you makes you weaker. And I think that that's propagated by misinformed parents, is propagated by schools sometimes,
Mhm.
it's propagated by media, and I think it is extremely damaging. I think it's one of the reasons when you look at Jonathan Haidt, the author of Anxious Generation, The Calling of the American Mind, there's a reason why his book is like one of the top bestsellers in like American, last couple of years in nonfiction. It's because he's like onto something. Like we have been coddling people, many people have been coddling children and youth far too much. And all that that coddling does is make somebody weaker for when
Mhm.
the ball really kind of drops. That being said, to answer the second part of your question, I think that there's like two coasts. There's the coast of self compassion and there's the coast of anti fragility. And it's like somebody needs to be like New Mexico, like right in the middle ish,
Mhm.
in the sense that it's like you need to be both, self compassionate and you need to be anti like fragile
Mhm.
in the sense that like, if you push yourself just so hard, and I'm more on that push yourself side, but if you push yourself to this point of like a breakdown, which I did, that's not helpful. Likewise, if you're just laying on a beach all the time and you're not doing anything and just eating Doritos all day, that's also not good. So I think it's to sometimes think of like, how do you strive to be better and be incredibly ambitious while at the same time not pushing yourself? And part of it, the final thing I'll say on this, part of it is just like listening to your body. Like, when does your body sometimes tell you, okay,
Mhm.
I need a break? I need to go for a walk outside. And I think if you listen to your body, you can find a better balance.
Yeah, that's so good. I always view anti-fragile as like, for me in like I was in the Marine Corps, as you mentioned, and I went to Bosnia, Somalia, Haiti, so was all involved in all those conflicts. So there's nothing worse than what I experienced with that. So I have a reference point of me being fragile. Like that's pretty heavy duty being a war, seeing people killed and all that. That's pretty high that most people don't experience that, small population. So I know my CEO yelling at me or, my best friend being pissed off at me. That's so small compared to on my scale of what a 10 is, and I know there's a lot of, it can break you. We have a lot of, suicides and PTSD and all that. And I'm not discounting the mental health part of it all. And I'm not encouraging people to go into the military or none of that stuff. But I am saying get to the point to where you have a scale where you can bounce it off of. You could be like, "Oh, okay, this isn't that bad. My ego is just making this something that's bigger than what it is. I'm not feeling good enough, or they hurt my feelings, those type of things I think helps with anti-fragile. I want to shift into the generalist skills because this is really interesting. You emphasize like communication, collaboration. I would put leadership in there as being critical, especially when it comes to automated world. Because like we're seeing what's happening, like so many people coding years. You can make, 150,000 or more, a year coding. And now AI just come in and whoosh, took all that away. What do you think when you think of generalist skills? What did you mean by that in the book?
I think generalist skills are skills that can be applied to like many different kinds of settings. So fundamentally, it's like you need it whether you're a banker or you're a teacher or you're a construction worker. And examples of generalist skills in terms of categories would be communications. Like we all are communicating all the time. It doesn't matter what job that you're doing. That's a core generalist skill. Another core generalist skill is like the ability to work with other people. Pretty much in everything, you have to like work with other people. And fundamentally, if you're not good at those two things, it's pretty hard to be successful, like no matter what you do.
Do you feel like, yeah, I know in the not-for-profit world, these are the two things that set you apart, like the communication and collaboration. I mean, that's what you have to do, especially I think now, because I talk to so many people that don't understand communication or collaboration because they're so, I mean, what happened with, in COVID and all that, everybody's become so isolated, don't have a lot of friends. So they're not communicating a lot. They're not collaborating. They're doing everything with their two thumbs. So to me, this is a superpower. What you're saying, I don't want people to overlook this because if you can communicate and collaborate, you're done. That's what companies are looking for. I want you to talk a little bit more about how important this is. And how can, our listeners start developing it to stand out in their...
I think it's arguably like the most important thing that you can do in giving this advice, like kind of generally to like a broad audience. I think in terms of kind of communications, one way that you can become better at it is just through practice, which is essentially like go out and do public speaking. Like go do Toastmasters, go do a presentation at work. Like it doesn't need to be a formal club, but like you just need to go out there and speak a lot. In my context, I did competitive debating in high school, taught me a ton. I remember when I was a middle schooler doing debating, I was like not a very good public speaker at all. And even in Venture for Canada, I hosted a podcast in the past for a while, and it taught me a ton about being like more authentic or being comfortable speaking in a situation kind of like this. So practice a lot. That's how you get better at communicating. And also, I think just recognizing that like every opportunity that you're talking with somebody is an opportunity to communicate. It's not just about speaking in front of a big room. It's also about how you're speaking to your mom. It's about how you're speaking to a friend. Like every single time you're talking, it's an opportunity to practice your communication skills. On the second part, in terms of collaboration, it's also recognizing it comes through like practice. So get involved in group projects if you're a student, get involved in clubs, like sign up at work for something that is like a interdisciplinary or cross-functional like team, and ask people for feedback on how you are collaborating. And the final thing I'll share too is like use ChatGPT as like a little bit of an assistant. Like if you have ChatGPT recording your meetings, ask ChatGPT for advice on, okay, how did I handle that? Like, what could I have done better? Like AI can be an amazing coach if it's recording your conversations.
100%, dude. That is so right on. This is, guys, I want you to listen to what Scott just said. This is so, in a world where everybody is on their phones, if you can communicate, and you could, like you said, you could practice with your mom. Like buy books on communicating and understand it and practice. Have friends, go have a cup of coffee, sit down, practice listening. And what does active listening look like? All those things are so great. You will be successful in this world if you can communicate and collaborate. I mean, period. Like what you said is so perfect. It's amazing. I want to get into, in your book, you advocate for entrepreneurial mindset. And we always think of that word entrepreneur and we think, yeah, I'm going to go start a business. I'm going to do my own thing or whatever. How do you have an entrepreneurial mindset? And you talk about this in a traditional role, and why is that important?
Fundamentally, being entrepreneurial is the ability to identify and act upon opportunities to create value for others. So if you want an entrepreneurial mindset, there's two things you need to do. The first is you need to get good at spotting opportunities. And how do you get good at spotting opportunities? You consume information omniversely. Like you're constantly reading, you're going on social media and following right accounts, you're getting email newsletters, you're reading books, you're listening to podcasts. That's how you talk to interesting people. That's how you come up and ultimately begin to spot interesting ideas that not that many other people see. The second is that you need to get better at acting on ideas. And that relates to what I was talking about earlier, which is that you need to learn to actually take steps to realize your vision and make it into a reality. And how you can apply this to a less entrepreneurial environment is think about like little wins that you can do. Like maybe it's around saying, hey, we don't need somebody to take like notes in all of our meetings. Like let's use an AI note taker for that. And people are like, cool, let's do that. So even if you're not a very entrepreneurial environment, that's one thing you can do. And the other is like begin to like suss out who are the other people in the organization that also believe in taking risks and making things better. Form alliances with those people because it's together. That's how you can push change through in a more risk averse environment.
I love that. That is so right on. Because I think people need to understand what you just said is so critical. Like for me, if I view every role that I'm in as my own business and I take 100% personal responsibility for what's happening and I'm communicating and collaborating, like you said, there's no one that's going to let go of me. They're going to, offer me, if you want to know how to advance, this is it. I mean, because a lot of people, the 9 to 5 job means I don't have to take responsibility. But if you in your 9 to 5 job, if you take responsibility, you're gonna get promoted because there's so many people that, leadership is so missing. I want to talk about, your story of overcoming social anxiety from childhood bullying. Because I know like being an introvert, I'm an introvert. I've worked really hard at not being that. In the sense of I want to say an introvert is like if I'm around a lot of people, I can get drained. So I have to like have my own time and do my own things to kind of charge my battery up, which is opposite of an extrovert. An extrovert needs people to fill up their battery. When you look at childhood bullying and how that imprinted into your brain, and what did that do before you learned to overcome it? And how was the complexities of, getting into college and then a job with that?
Years in elementary school were in many cases my worst of my entire life. Like I actually think probably grade 5 and 6. If I'm 34 now, almost 34, those were like the worst 2 years of my life because it was just relentless like bullying. Like I would go to school and it just felt like people were being mean to me kind of constantly and that I wasn't welcome. And I remember going to a birthday party in grade 5 and somebody who I thought I was like friends with was like, said in front of everybody that like I was his least favorite like person in front. And I remember like sitting with that when I was like, 10 or 11 and just being like feeling such like shame. And shame is such a powerful emotion. I remember even a situation when I was 5, I was at this person's house. Me and him were playing, like mom was looking after the kids, and this person got invited to go to another person's house, and the mom took the kid to this other person's house, and then just left me with her, like this person's like mom, for like hours, just me by myself with this like random. And by the way, as an aside, I do not know how boneheaded and dumb the mom was to do that to like
Yeah, I do with it.
a child. Anyway, all to say is that those situations were incredibly tough. And I think that, to a point about, especially when you're young, like I think when if I'm 35, okay, get over it. But when you're like 5 years old, some of those things can like sit with you in a way that's a little bit more emotionally kind of like raw.
Yeah.
And I ultimately, it kind of taught me at that younger age that like, okay, I'm not worthy or I'm not likable. I remember then being in college and kind of getting drunk with some friends and saying to one like, "Oh, I wish I could be like you. You're just like naturally likable. People just like you." And I was like, that's kind of like messed up. I'm like, why do I have this deeply ingrained view that I'm just like not a likable person? And in terms of advice for listeners, is I think part of it is just being like, okay, so I was stigmatized when I was younger for who I was, and that made me not like my like authentic self. And then as I got older and I was around more people who liked me authentically, I was more confident. And I think at the core, what is social anxiety? Social anxiety is fear that people don't like who you are, your authentic, like actual kind of self. That you need to put like a wall up. And I think when you start to realize that like you are a valuable person, your authentic self is likable, and also like not everyone's gonna like you, and that's like
Yeah.
okay. So for me, part of it is like getting out of your comfort zone, and I think really leaning into that like authenticity and saying, okay, I'm going to be my authentic self, and that's okay. And I'm not always going to be loved by people. The one final thing I would say as a caveat, though, because I include this in the book, is being your authentic self is not justification for just like not doing your job. And I think sometimes people take the authentic self point way far to the extreme. But I do think if you're trying to overcome social anxiety, doing the inner work of accepting who you are is integral to becoming less stressed out in social situations.
That's so good, bro. And you've built a vast network and inspiring, and you've doing it not for profit. So you've taken that, you've alchemized it, and now you're doing something that is 180 degrees from that. I mean, you could have been built, this thing all by yourself, alone, and not, and kind of or figured out another business you could have done and never handled it. So obviously, you've worked with this, childhood trauma. Something that you said I think is really important is authenticity, and no one talks about this. And I don't think a lot of people, especially I talk to young leaders and they're like, well, I need to act this way or I need to be this way. Or, I think I'm going to be like David Goggins and I'm going to run, till my knees fall off, or I'm going to be like you had mentioned, in Canada, Justin Trudeau or Donald Trump, whoever. I'm going to be like this type of person, no one. And then they're on social media and they're looking. And, I even see it in as far as, and I'm not getting political at all. We don't do that on this episode. But one of the things I see too is like people are, and you can understand this coming from, because I know when did you come out of the closet? Like, how old were you?
I was 20. It's senior year, so 20. I was 21.
Okay, yeah, yeah. So, in different communities, having this ability to be able to be authentic and have the strength enough to do that. And I think that's something that is really important because we're just bouncing from one thing to the next, next I'm this, next I'm this, next I'm this, and we don't really know. What advice would you give for someone that feels like they have imposter syndrome or they don't know, they have no clarity in their authenticity? And how did you have the strength enough to become authentic even with all this trauma?
I think in the context of imposter syndrome, you first need to like label it. So say like, hey, I have imposter syndrome. The second is to have like the self-compassion for like maybe why that like exists.
Hmm.
And the third is to say, like, move forward and take action. Like, regardless of if you think you're an imposter or not, in some ways you have to like sit with those thoughts and just like move forward and take little steps. So it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. In terms of my own personal kind of journey of like sort of self-acceptance, I think there was a degree, maybe a couple of things. Like one was uh sort of finding your tribe of like people and friends. And the more that you meet people who like you for who you authentically are, the more I think you feel like confident in kind of who you are. I think a second thing is just like achievement in some ways. Like for me, the more that I actually like have successfully achieved things, the more that I've also built that sort of self-esteem and say like, hey, I'm not that bad of a person. I've done like X, Y, and Z. And you don't want to tie your self-worth too much to achievement, but candidly, I think it does matter. And it did help me in my sort of self acceptance. And I think a third thing that was helpful for me is that like coming out of the closet and like being authentic and accepting like who I am. Like if you're trying to hide fundamental like aspects of you, whether that's coming out of the closet or just like you're hiding an aspect of like your personality, it doesn't really matter. But
Right.
you need to, I think, be your to thine own self be true. You need to accept and not hide who you are if you're ultimately going to be authentic in the world.
That's so good. And that's why I think it's sorely missing, especially in schools. You've mentioned a lot of philosophy, just, not only in your book, but, talking this conversation. So obviously you've studied that, you have a learning mindset. That's why I think philosophy is so important. And we don't teach it enough, or people don't take the time to learn it enough. And I think it's like, whether it's Stoic or nihilism or existentialism, whatever it may be, it doesn't matter. I think you should study them all. I love reading them all. I'll read like woo-woo spiritual stuff. I like it all. And I think it's so interesting because whenever you do that, it helps you like something in your mind. You're like, oh, I get that. That makes sense to me. Marcus Aurelius said this. I could apply that to my life. He did this and this, and I think it kind of gives you an example of whether you're an atheist. What it doesn't matter what we always put like religious things in there, but we always stay in this little box. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think a lot of the times people don't spend enough time to go back and actually think of like what are the big ideas, the big kind of concepts, and how do those actually like shape kind of our lives. So I'm a big fan of reading kind of philosophy or even novels that sometimes make you kind of think about like the bigger picture.
Yes.
And I think so many people are so busy like doing, and not enough people are busy thinking about being.
Yeah, yeah. No, you're so right about that. And reading is a superpower. I know it's hard with everybody has OCD. I mean, you've been diagnosed with it. I was diagnosed a long time ago. So it's hard to read and it's disciplined, it takes discipline to read, but it's so important. It's the thing I think that has helped me be successful. I want to get into we're coming up on the hour. So I want to get into just a couple more questions and then we'll be done. But you have a personal advisory board. And for listeners early in their careers, especially people being lonely, they have limited connections or resources. How can they approach potential advisors without feeling intimidated? And why do you think it's so important to have an advisory board?
Personal advisory board is not like a formal board of directors. So just to kind of give caveat to listeners, it's a group of like 5 or 6 or 7, or it could be 4 people that are like key people who give advice to you in your life, or that are role models to you. And it's based on this concept that comes from research from MIT, which is that people who have a personal advisory board are more successful than someone who just has like one mentor. Because the reality is that we need many different kinds of advice in our life stuff and career. So it's great to have like a mentor who you can go to for general like life advice. But then it's great to sometimes have like a career advisor who's like in your specific industry, knows a ton about it, and can give you like advice around like your industry. Sometimes it's good to have someone within your specific company who can give you advice on like the politics within that company. Sometimes it's good to have a role model who you don't even know, but could be like your inspiration and say, this person, I read their books, they are inspiring me to do something. So when you're thinking about mentorship, like don't think about it just in terms of having a mentor. Think about building out a team of people who can help you in different ways based on their skill sets and experience.
And I know Venture for Canada, we'll close in this question. Venture for Canada, you have a whole, and I'd love to get you on our Tartle TCast, startup side of things and do just a whole episode on Venture for Canada. But you note the tripling anxiety in your book among young Canadian women, rising in mental health challenges. I just watched, the new leader you guys elected. He was talking about mental health big time the other day in a speech. And, you've supported thousands through Venture for Canada, thousands of young people. What do you think, if you had to, last question, most empowering lesson that you've learned and that you've seen in helping young people, from uncertainty in their lives into a strength? What is that professionally or personally? What do you think that is?
To me, the most important thing that you can do to build a better relationship with uncertainty is recognizing there is so much opportunity in uncertainties. Uncertainty is something that's like scary, that everything amazing in our lives comes from uncertain situations, whether it's like a first date with like a potential romantic partner, or it's the birth of a new child. In some ways, the birth of life is the most uncertain thing because you have no idea how that life is going to end up. Whenever life is brought into the world, it is the epitome of uncertainty. And lives can be beautiful, but they can also be tragic and painful. And that is part of the human existence. But it's to recognize that in uncertainty exists possibility, and that without uncertainty, there is no possibility and ultimately no joy.
That's so good. Yes. And that's the title of your book. We'll end in that. Everyone get the link below, The Uncertainty Advantage. Scott, really appreciate you being on the podcast. There was so many nuggets here, so much truth, very practical. That's what I love. We can I think it's good to kind of get up into the ether, but sometimes it's good to have that grounding and to be able to have those practical steps that you can put into place and do right now. And that's what your book is, The Uncertainty Advantage. So we encourage everyone to get it below. Thank you.
Thank you very much.